Theuns Roux and the Director for Operational Excellence at Nutrien. For those of you that are not familiar with Nutrien, we're a recently merged company that is between Agrium and Potash Corp. We merged at the beginning of this year. We're around 20,000 employees strong. We operate in potash, nitrogen, phosphate, and also have a significant retail arm globally. I believe we operate around 14 countries globally, and we distribute our product in over 100. So probably a little bit more about me. I spent a little bit the last 10 years in the mining industry predominantly with BHP Billiton, or BHP now, in Australia and in Singapore. 8 months ago, I took my role as leading the operational excellence team and also the digital strategy team at Nutrien. So exciting times ahead of us. So I think today's topic, I know we've all spoken about change management here quite a lot in the last 2 days. And yes, we are speaking about change management again, so bear with me. We are on the home stretch here. The topic today is what we believe to be very simple, but also super, super difficult. Before I'm going to get into it, what I want to ask the audience to do is just take 10 seconds to think a little bit about your most recent New Year's resolution. One of those things that you said you really, really want to do, and you believe that you could achieve that. Just take 10 seconds to think about that. So it might not have been a full 10 seconds, but I believe you've had an opportunity. So now take 5 seconds to think about how long did it take you to break that commitment or that promise that you made to yourself to actually achieve that New Year's resolution. Well, how did we go? Did you lose that additional 10 pounds or quit smoking? If you didn't, you're definitely not alone. So what we're seeing in statistics in 2018 in the US alone, only 1 in 5 people, followed through on their New Year's resolution. So that means about 80% of people did not. So it's an interesting stat. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Today I'm standing here, and I think most of you can stand on the stage to talk about change management. It's something that we all do daily. It's something that we all have to practice in today's environment. I'm standing here from experience in the last 10 years, like I said, in the mining industry. I've also spoken extensively to some of you in this room about your change journey and where you've come from. So I believe the collective experience that we've got, I hope I can bring some points to you today that might resonate with you and you can take it home with you. The one thing that's fascinated me about change is we as humans, our ability to change and adapt. I've had the privilege to have lived in 5 countries to date, and it's fascinating. Every single time you move to a new country, you think, well, I've been there, I've done that. This should be fairly straightforward. Yet every single time, change seems to surprise you and seem to challenge you. But as humans, we've got this amazing ability to overcome this change. So let's talk a little bit about why should we care from a mining perspective. So why should we care? Well, I'll take a stab in saying that sophisticated technology for the mining industry has been around for decades. Yet, we in the mining industry have been extremely slow to adopt these technology changes. In 2015, when I was working with one of the majors in Australia, we estimated that we received about 6 million data points per day from our operational equipment. 6 million. We used less than 1% of that dynamically. At Nutrien, we've got world-class network infrastructures underground at some of our sites. Yet we severely underutilize these as well for now. We look at teleremote as a technology. This is something that has literally been around for decades, yet this industry is only now getting excited about it. I know this is something that you all would have heard probably this week and before, definitely, but you know, it's an oldie, but it's a favorite. Let's think about Blockbuster. Again, Blockbuster used to be a well-known name in any US household. In the early 90s, we see Netflix emerge. And at that stage, this is where Netflix actually approached Blockbuster and said, would you like to buy us out? Of course, we know Blockbuster declined and said, no, we will follow our own strategy and we will do and follow our business model. As we know today, Blockbuster is bankrupt. In North America, they've got one store, and that is based out in Alaska. On the other hand, Netflix in 2018 has got around 137 million subscribers, about 60 million of those sitting here in the US. So you might ask yourself, why am I talking about technology when I said I'm talking about change management? The reality is that I'm talking about the fundamentals of change here. Another example that I think every one of us would be sick of it by now, but bear with me, it's the iPhone. It's 11 years since its release. Today we use the iPhone to order dinner, to order a cab, to do our banking, and many other things. When you look at what the iPhone has done, a lot of people will say that it revolutionized the industry. I'll put to you that it did not revolutionize the industry, but more so the App Store and the ecosystem around that revolutionized the industry, but also made the change stick. So I think it's a good question for us as an industry. How will we react to the digital transformation that is coming? Will we be the 1 in 5 that actually follows through and make the change stick, or will we not be the 1 in 5? So what does this mean for mining? So I'm not going to go into conventional mining because we all know conventional mining. We've been doing it for centuries. What I am going to talk about is some of the digital trends that we see. And these are some of the digital trends that we're exploring at the moment at Nutrien. And I'm not going to talk to all of these, but I will talk to some. Predictive maintenance is one of those. We're all familiar with that. It's where essentially we're using technology and allowing this technology on our equipment to tell us when something needs to be maintained or not maintained. Let's think about a connected worker. Connected worker is essentially where you have the ability to monitor health and look at real-time location for all of our employees. Autonomous equipment is another one, where we're removing our operators from the seat and essentially let the machine doing the work itself. And then there's remote operations. So remote operations is really one of the things that I want to use today to leverage and illustrate some of the challenges that we will be facing with this change journey ahead of us. Now, many of us here know that remote operations covers a significant amount of things and can cover a significant amount of things. I'll talk about some of the activities, so things like planning, execution work, and improvement work. These things can be done from a value chain perspective at the mine, at the plant, and logistics as well. And on top of that, we see that you can actually use the remote locations as well to do it over different time horizons, long-term, short-term, real-time. So I think many of us here can see and understand and realize the benefits that remote locations and operations have. And many of you in this room might have already moved some of your functions like long-term planning and improvement off-site years ago. The interesting thing to note is that even some of these lower tech activities has caused us some challenges. In Australia, most of the major mining companies have some sort of remote operations center. I've been personally involved in one of them, where I've seen firsthand the benefits of what they can produce, and it's significant. On the other hand, I've also seen the change and the impact of change management that it actually demands. Around 5 to 10 years ago, I would say that most of the Australian mining companies started with something called integrated remote operations. This was set up essentially to monitor and optimize rail logistics and dispatch. In large part, this was hugely successful. We've managed to kind of create capacity at the bottleneck, which in this instance is the port operations. We've improved throughput 10 to 20% at most of these locations. And the good thing about what they did here was they focused on the value, not necessarily on technology. What we see with the move from the mining companies now is that they've started thinking, well, we've already got this integrated operations center, so why don't we actually think about moving some of the activities from site to these integrated operations centers? So, as we know, we've all seen heavy investment in Australia and other parts of the world into automation for trucks, drilling, plants, and many other factors as well. I want to pause there for a second and make you think about some of the challenges that we face in moving these mining activities over. I can tell you now it's been a challenge, and it still remains to be a challenge, but what's the difference between what we did with rail and moving rail logistics off to a remote location, and what's the difference then to mining activities that we're moving off? So think a little bit about the core technology. From the rail perspective, we had the core technology mainly there at the time that we were doing this. There was no huge impact to employees at the time of doing this, even though this was 5 to 10 years ago. We're looking at mining operations today, and we're saying, well, we do have the core technology there as well. We've got the bandwidth. And sometimes I think we spend too much time to focus on the technology, but we miss out on looking at what are those things that the technology actually causes to change, directly or indirectly. And I think it's worthwhile today to consider some of those changes that we see now with mining operations being moved to remote locations. So what are some of these issues? And some of these issues cannot be fixed by technology. I would put to you that these issues would have to be fixed by changing operating models, the way we operate, and culture, which will underpin this change. So some of those changes that I refer to, let's think about those. So one, I think we can all see this one, which is accountability and control. Historically, you've had the decision line being very clear. The GM was ultimately in charge of the site. And in some jurisdictions, this was even reflected in legislation. I think we can all agree that there's significant value in remote operations where you can actually make big decisions from far away. These decisions can be to inform, they can be to decide, and sometimes even to control some of our operational activities. So that is one. Thinking a little bit about another one, which is situational awareness or context. So I think we can all agree again that you can pump as much data and information into machines or even to remote operators, but the context might not necessarily be there. The issue is we're creating and making our own lives hard. And why do I say that? Is because we're trying to solve for something and we're missing the situational awareness issue and how tough it is to do this remotely. Let's think a little bit about relationships. I think all of us in this room like to think that our processes are fairly solid, and then if we do make a move to something like integrated operations, that our processes will be robust enough to sustain that change. I think we all, if we really think about it, will also realize that it takes personal relationships to make these processes work. So it's not that easy. And then finally, capability is shifting. I know we've all heard that this week a lot. Capability is really shifting. The operator of today will not be the operator of tomorrow. This is a challenge that we will face with remote operations. We need to think about how we're attracting new talent into this industry, and we also need to think about how do we actually keep our current talent engaged. And this will be a challenge. I think all these points that I made here today, I would say, points to a real challenge. I think that we will have to rethink the way our operating models are set up, the way we lead, the way we innovate, the way we improve. I do think, though, that if we can get these things right, it will determine whether we succeed or whether we fail with a lot of these initiatives that we are now pursuing. It is really worthwhile to pause for a moment and ask, are these challenges really unique to the mining industry? And of course the answer to that is no, it's not, if at all. So I think we can learn a lot from other industries. An example would be the increasing depth that we see in the North Sea oil fields. 30 to 40 years ago, the oil and gas sector was essentially forced to solve for this situational awareness dilemma I referred to earlier. This was not due to the fact that they had nothing else to do. It was due to the fact that they had too many safety incidents and situational awareness was not present. So they solved for this 30 to 40 years ago. We can learn from other industries. From this oil and gas industry we can learn from other industries as well, like aviation or defense, where these industries use highly sophisticated technology, intelligent, and also have a very high safety requirement that they need to comply with. I think what I want to try and say here today is that technology is not necessarily the challenge, as we like to sometimes think, but it's the change that comes from incorporating a lot of this technology. I'll leave you with this thought in thinking on this slide that, the pace of change that we're experiencing today will never be slower than now. This is really the slowest pace of change that we'll experience. So we've looked a little bit at the digital trends. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the external forces that we see facing this mining industry as well. Next generation. I think we've all heard that term as well this week. On average, if I remember correctly, we've got the folks in America graduating with bachelor degrees at roughly an age of 24.8. This means they were born around 1993. Correlating that with the iPhone release, they were around 14 years old when the iPhone was released. So a very different generation. What we're seeing is that this younger generation is certainly demanding something different. They're putting a lot more value on work-life balance than any other earlier generation. I think we've all experienced that already. Purpose and impact. Anytime I interview a new candidate, when you ask them, what would you like to get out of the job? Inevitably, the response will be something along the lines of, I want to make an impact. I want to have a purpose bigger than just making a profit for the company. So this is something that we need to think about as well, and how we actually address this need from the next generation. One of my favorites, attractive geographical locations. This is something that the mining industry is not necessarily known for. So I think it's something that we should and could do a lot better. Let's think a little bit about some of the social factors and how this is shifting around the world. You've got society's expectations shifting around the consumption of electricity and water usage. You've got environment rehabilitation. This is dictated and legislated in many jurisdictions now. This is things that we need to think about. And one of the big things that's coming out in the mining industry, and it's something that we can really not shy from, is the impacts of mental health. Mental health is becoming a significant issue all across the industry, and it's something that this industry needs to get right. Let's think a little bit about regulatory. Carbon taxes. In Canada, we're facing carbon taxes. This is something that is very important to us, and no doubt it's also very important to our shareholders, as it directly impacts our bottom line. And I think that carbon tax is not unique to Canada. Some other things might be things like access to new resources. This might become harder and harder as we see the younger generation and society actually placing a lot less value on some of the things that was historically seen as a no-brainer. So we've discussed some of the digital trends. We've looked at some of the external forces. I want to talk to you a little about some of the things that I think we will need to do from a change management perspective to succeed in this environment. So first of all, we cannot forget the basics. Organizations don't change, but people do. So what are some of these basics I'm referring to? And these are the basics for change management, and this is not an exhaustive list that I'll mention here. But a case for change. Why are we doing the change? I think we all know that this is vitally important, and if we get this right, you can go a long way. So how do we articulate the case for change so it reaches not only certain parts of the organization, but all parts of the organization? Vitally important. Think a little bit about a burning platform. For some of us, a burning platform is easy. Things like declining grade or a decline in the commodity price. For others, it's not that easy because we're still enjoying healthy margins. So how do we create a burning platform? I believe some of the things that we've just discussed before, that's cause for creating a burning platform. And that can definitely serve us well. Another one, sponsorship. An authentic sponsorship at the right level of the organization. If we have this, I think we set up for success. If we don't, we set ourselves up for failure. And then think about trust and collaboration. Technology will enable collaboration, but technology will not replace it. So how do we do that well? And these are the basics. We all do it. We should continue to do it. But I would put to you today that we're going to have to do something different because the environment is becoming more complex that we're operating in. As we see digital emerging in these industries, it's going to become a lot more complex. So I think I've got a couple of things that we can consider as things that are new and things that we can consider in this new change. And I hope the next slide is not too gory for many of you in this room. Capability requirements are shifting. So we need to do the basics well, but here are some of the new things. Like I said before, the operator of today will not be the operator of tomorrow. The skills required to operate equipment from a remote location will be very different to what you see today in the mine, whether it be open pit or underground. Data scientists, it's a word that we in the industry now love to start playing with. And some of us already have a lot of data scientists. Do we really know what they do? Does the organization really know what they actually do? I think data scientists will become certainly a much more valued commodity in the near future. And I also believe that computer programmers will see a demand coming in for the mining industry in the very near future. I think this is something that is inevitable, and like I said, the capabilities are changing, and we need to think about how do we address that. Another one, cross-functional matrix structures. These things are quite complex, and they add a lot of constraints. So I think about a cross-functional matrix structure in a way that is something that not necessarily give you a direct line of ownership. It requires you to collaborate a lot. It takes away this sense or this notion of ownership with our teams. If you think about your team and you say that you own this piece of work, how much motivation is driven from that? A lot of people are motivated by that. I know I am. So how do we overcome that? Because matrix structures will certainly, in some instances, contradict that. We will need to think about how we align our incentives of our teams to add value and to make sure that we focus on value. I think, again, collaboration and the ways that we work will be vitally important. Again, technology will help us, but we need to make sure that we use this right. So that's another one. And finally, I think this word is a buzzword, but it's also got some meaning, agile. Agile is a way of working. This new era of digital that we're entering in will demand that we become a lot more agile than we are today. No longer can we in the mining industry take 12 to 24 months to do a proof of concept that we know probably halfway through it's not going to be successful, but we continue anyway because that's what we said we're going to do. We need to start thinking about testing and learning. We need to start thinking about failing and failing fast. I know these are buzzwords, but I think it's something that we really need to incorporate in this industry, and something that will set us up well for the future. So these are the three things I believe that we will need, and this is, again, not an exhaustive list. Speaking about that, I want to leave you here today with 5 points or key takeaways that you can consider as you kind of go into this journey and embrace digital in this industry, and I certainly think that we as an industry are doing that. I'll leave you with some of these 5 key takeaways, what I think we can do to succeed. So 1, prioritize value always. Always prioritize for value. 2, execute the basics that we just discussed really well and adopt these new ways of working. If you've been doing the basics of change management at a level of a B+ or a B, you'll now have to up your game. You're going to have to do this at A+, plus you're going to include some new ways of working. 3, measure progress and celebrate success. Again, something that is so easy, but yet we neglect to do it so often. Number 4, embed future change requirements, but don't overreact. What do I mean by that? I think we need to make sure that we know what's coming next. We need to understand what's coming next, but we should not overreact about what it is. We don't have to be agile tomorrow, but we can prepare for it today or tomorrow. And then finally, collaborate amongst ourselves, our partners, and other industries. And I, for one, am certainly open to collaboration, so if you want to collaborate with me or with us, absolutely reach out and feel free to do that. And I thank you very much for your time today.